Welcome everyone to this very special edition of Calling the Audible. It's the Hall of Fame edition. It's going to be an actual series, I believe a 7-part series where we unveil all of the Hall of Fame inductees, I guess. They're no longer candidates, they're now inductees. The voting has been completed, all the votes have been tallied, and due to our inability to actually have an actual recount, these are final. But all these members are very much deserving. I'm going to go into a little bit about why. Each day we will release a new podcast, a new video describing each new inductee. And before we get into that, of course, and I'm joined by President Rob Campana, President of FPF. We're going to talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame before we start. Rob, how's it going?
I'm good. You, Paulo?
If people want to complain about the inductees and voice their opinion,
at Peeze FPF.
At Peeze FPF is where they should contact us. Absolutely. That's where you can reach out to me. I'm at Peeze FPF pretty much everywhere except on Facebook. I am Peeze Del Rees. I'm fairly available, as most players know by this point. For those of you who don't, feel free to reach out to me at any time. We are brought to you by Sportiera Cage, where if it's in the game, it's in the cage. Eagle at Master Control, of course, has given us a hand, and we'll have something to talk about with regards to Eagle later in the week. But for now, we'll get into the Hall of Fame as a general concept and why it was introduced. I mean, one of the first things I noted, Rob, when I first started playing in FPF, I believe the Hall of Fame came in just shortly after, and I was like, this is a recreation league, why do we have a Hall of Fame?
Right before, didn't you start in spring 2011?
Spring 2011, yeah.
Okay, so it was right before. So
well, I only found it later on the website.
Oh, there you
go. Because my first season, I didn't even know we had a website or stats or playoffs. I thought we were allowed to block. So Rob, tell us about the process of incorporating Hall of Fame into FPF, why we went that way, why it is you thought it'd be a good idea. It's a great idea, by the way. I think it's a great way to honor players who played many seasons and have played at the highest levels of competition. Please tell me, like, what came to you in the middle of the night to do this?
You know what, Paulo? It's something that I thought over a few years leading up to 2011. It was something that kind of was discussed between myself and Darren Basmajan. For those of you who remember Darren, who was highly involved in the league before Darren and before Paulo and Eagle.
The black and white FPF era.
Exactly, got him out of. But no, so basically, Darren and I were thinking that it would be really cool for us to find a way to kind of, honor and shine a spotlight on those who have really performed well over the years in FPF, both from a performance standpoint and from a longevity standpoint. There was a lot of people who had played in our league at that point already for 10, 12 seasons, and we thought, what better way to honor them than to actually add them to a Hall of Fame and further separate them even more from the pack and really exemplify these guys as basically the bread and butter of our league up until that point.
And it's interesting, in the first few seasons, Rob, we saw some obvious names. We saw Kevin Wyeth get in. We saw guys of that nature. So as it's continued, however, the races have become tighter, I believe. And the distinctions between who should get in first ballot and who will wait, just by virtue of how thick the classes are getting.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a trend that will continue, or will there be more clear-cut Hall of Fame entries as we go on?
It's a good question, Paulo. I think, well, first things first, I think that the process of how guys get in has changed over the years.
Yeah, well, maybe for those who don't know, but maybe we can go into to how we do select these members.
Sure. So basically, when we started the process in 2011, Darren and myself basically sat down in a room, he and I alone, without consulting anybody else, and said, okay.
Sounds very democratic.
Yeah, it does. And we said, who deserves this? 5 guys. We kind of went through a list of candidates without explicitly putting them out there, and we narrowed it down to 5 guys that we thought were most deserving, that fit all the criteria that we had set forth, and those were our Hall of Famers. We did that for the first 2 years. And then kind of as we started to gain this pool of Hall of Famers, past inductees, who also kind of always wanted to weigh in and had their viewpoints and their opinion that they wanted to share.
Well, we see it on the Facebook walls now, right?
Yeah, for sure.
As soon as it gets mentioned, as soon as the names get listed, we have players voicing their opinions.
Yeah,
absolutely.
no,
I can imagine back in the day that being
exactly, and it was a smaller group back then, right? So there was the first 5, then 10 guys who came to me and said, "Hey, Rob, we'd like to kind of have a say in this." And obviously, some people thought that there was a bias bias, and bias is a word that you and I can discuss after, because it's almost impossible not to have bias in anything that involves a vote. But so what we did, Paulo, is starting, I think, in the third year, we said, okay, let's open this up to a vote, and we gave the players an equal vote. So essentially, myself and Darren had one vote out of the pool of, let's say, 10 or 15, whatever it was. And what we noticed is that although, you know, democracy is always good, the bias was really heavily slanted towards, I mean, let's be honest, Paulo, guys, and I've been pleasantly impressed over the last few years where guys, I'm the only person who right now who sees the ballots, and I'm always impressed with, you know, people would think, well, this guy, you know, player X is only going to vote for his teammates or his buddies, but often what is the case is, in fact, that they don't just vote for their friends or even at all, or not at the top of their ballot. I've been pretty impressed with the objectivity that people, you know,
I think a lot of that, Rob, has been as the league has progressed, guys have played on different teams, played with different people. The community has grown. They've played in different leagues together, where they don't necessarily play together in FPF. They may play together outdoors and in tournaments. And the podcast and the coverage, it gives players a chance to hear about other people they wouldn't necessarily hear about, and there's greater exposure for all the players. Absolutely,
no, it's a very fair point. So that's it. So over the few years after that, we kind of started to see that although a democratic process made more sense, I personally found that it was very biased. You saw teams, for instance, not to pick on them because they're very deserving, but Montreal's Finest had already 3 or 4 guys in the Hall of Fame, and every time someone came up, although they probably did deserve to be in there, it was almost like hands down they were in, because, you know, 4 or 5 of their friends and teammates had a vote out of a pool. Such a big
part of the voting pool,
That's it, you know. So what we did is, over the last few seasons, what we did is we shifted back to kind of a split vote, where essentially the players have 50% of the vote, and then the staff holds the other 50%. That was something we used for a couple of years, and now finally I just opened it up to basically every single staff member that has knowledge of the, you know, not someone who just started scorekeeping 3 weeks ago, you know. And what we do is essentially now we have a pool of about 45 voters, you know, made up of, you know, I would say probably about 60% players, 40% players, and referees, and that's where we're at right now. And I see that the more the pool grows, obviously, like math will support, the bias tends to dilute itself more and more, and I feel like the voting has been quite fair. Now, that being said, there's still arguments to be made on both sides of the spectrum about how fair it is, in fact. And
well, to be honest, I think it's a fair process, and I think the way players have viewed it has changed somewhat, and we're going to get into that a little bit, but I think that it's not as rigid. The views of it is not as rigid as they used to be. The other thing to think about is we now live in a capped FPF. The reality has changed. And where I'm going with this is first of all, like the conversation comes up every season, Rob. Do you think lower division players should be welcomed into the Hall of Fame? It's not. So there's a bit of I called it paranoia on the Facebook wall a couple of weeks ago, and someone took offense to that. I didn't mean that person specific was paranoid. I meant that a lot of times the players from Division 1 and 2, it's been such an insular community that they feel that it's threatened, and while it must be so much easier to put up stats in lower division, and it likely is easier, but what happens typically is players that start in lower divisions move up and have a great impact, and great players tend to be great players and continue to be great, whereas players who just were good in Division 5 or Division 6, when they move up, tend to become average players and no longer put up the numbers that you would expect from a Hall of Fame candidate. So that's where I want to start, Robin. And where do you stand on this debate as to whether or not a lower division player should qualify for the Hall of Fame?
I think, Paulo, my viewpoint, and it's probably some people will hear this and say, I don't even know what he means. So it's not, obviously there's a lot of gray area involved, but I absolutely think on the record that lower division players, there's a place for them in the Hall of Fame. And I've had this debate with you, where Paulo, for those of you who don't, Paulo is the populist of FPF. He's always looking out for the lower division guys, and I love that about
Division 1 and 2 writer.
Exactly, that's it. You know, we tried to pull him back to the upper 1% to turn this political. But no, Paulo is, and that's fair and that's great, because Paulo always has the backs of the lower division teams, and he and I have had this discussion. But then at the same time, I've also had the debate with some players that I know well in Division 1, Division 2, who've argued with me that, hey, Rob, the Hall of Fame should strictly strictly be reserved for Division 1 and 2 guys. Now, of course, not all guys feel that way, but there are some higher division players that say, hey, like this is, you have a chance to move up in this league, and to me, if you haven't played against the best players in the league, then why should you be included in the Hall of Fame? It's a fair argument. I don't necessarily agree with it. Just like I think your argument is very fair, but of course, just being you, I don't particularly agree with it. But here's my view, Paulo, and I've told this to people in the past. Is I'll use an example of one player in particular, and I not to bring up a name, but Alexandre Gaudin. So his video came up this week. Chris Rivet's teammate posted something up, which I thought was really cool. And we see that more and more now. Guys are campaigning for their friends. In my eyes, and I hope that Alex Gaudin wouldn't see this as a negative, take a negative spin on this. I don't think Alex Gaudin is Division 1 or 2 caliber quarterback. Maybe
I
as
think
a player,
you might agree as well.
Yeah, as a player, because we've seen him snap, we've seen him play receiver, we've seen him play defense. He's a great athlete. I absolutely think he can compete in the higher division. As a quarterback, I think he's more or less capped at Division 3, which is where he is right now. And he's competing, and he has been for the last few seasons. Alex Gaudin has won 2 Division 4 championships. As you've mentioned, Division 4, these were divisions where there were 50-plus teams at the time. Yeah. So, which, although it is, like in some higher division players argue, well, it's easier in the lower divisions. They're right. Maybe
it's mathematically, it is mathematically less probable to win a championship in the lower division.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean that it requires greater talent. It's just less likely to win a championship.
Exactly. So
because of the volume of teams.
Also, the gap between the teams is much more large when you have 50 teams.
Yeah, of course. Which is what we've tried to minimize now, right? In the last few seasons.
By splitting Division 5, by splitting Division 4, it's become less the case. By putting in a cap, by putting in a quarterback cap, we've noticed that a lot less. And I would argue, like a guy like Alexandre Gaudin, and Jamil Springer, Hall of Fame candidate Jamil Springer, made this point. I thought it was an interesting point that if guys move up, and Alexandre Gaudin has from Division 5, Division 4, Division D, all the way up to Division 3, and I think Division B. That's at his level, and Division 3 is where it starts to become competitive, and that's where teams and players tend to get pushed up to. Now, to me, it becomes, and he said, look, if he's competing at the highest point that he can, then he absolutely should be considered. And the thing is, and I'm inclined to agree, because to me, it's not necessarily about overall talent. Sometimes people are talented but don't necessarily have a huge impact on the game. I heard it once that, can you describe the history of League X without this player? And if you cannot describe the history of this league without this player, then that person belongs in the Hall of Fame, because it's truly a museum of the history of that league. And so for me, a player, let's say, and I'll use Division 3, let's say, as a standard, because again, teams and players usually get pushed up to that point. If that player has had such of an impact and he's just not surrounded by teammates that will help bring him to a higher division,
he shouldn't be penalized for it, is what you're saying.
He shouldn't be penalized, because look, he might not have the network, he might not have the interest of, like, look, I have time to play one night a week, I want to play with my friends, but I still want to be competitive, and the team is still competitive, and I have a huge impact. Why not?
But my argument is, Paulo, and I didn't finish my point about it, but just to finish that point is, see, like at FPF, I think we're fair in a sense that we give guys like that. So for instance, let's say player X says, you know what, I'm here, I just want to play with my friends, like I'm a really talented player, but my friends are at this level, and we can go up to as high as division whatever it is, whether it's 4 or 3 or 5, and I compete there and I dominate. But then to me, there's nothing wrong with that player. He's still allowed to win. He's still allowed to win awards. He's still allowed to make the All-Star game. He's still allowed to win championships. But to me, if you're someone who isn't necessarily pushing yourself to the level that you belong in, then there's nothing wrong with you. We're not going to castrate you or do anything. But do you belong in the Hall of Fame? Maybe not. That's my viewpoint. But just to finish my point on Alex Gaudin, I'm going to call Jamil Springer out, because we had this conversation at the field and he stole my point. So Jamil Springer, you may be a Hall of Fame candidate, but you plagiarized my point. So basically, what you insinuated as well, and I think we all agree, is, to me, why I brought up Alex Gaudin is because he's challenged himself to play at a level where he's pretty much average or below average. So to me, I respect that. He's never played Division 1 or 2, but I'd rather see a guy who's won 2 championships at a level where he's pretty much at par with the other players, than a guy who is, I can tell the difference between a guy who belongs in Division 1 but is hot dogging it in Division 5, and dominating guys that aren't at his level, to me, I don't
But Rob, wouldn't you say that happens less and less now? Because
Yes,
again,
you're right.
I play in Division 5.
Yeah,
I play
no,
Division
you're
6.
absolutely right.
And I'm telling you, it's a lot easier for me to build my team in Division B
Yeah.
than it is for me to build my team in Division D or
You're
Division
absolutely
5.
right.
You know,
For sure.
It's difficult. It's
Yeah.
difficult to fit a guy of that caliber
Yeah.
in a lower division.
And I agree. And I think going forward, to your point, you're right. I think it's going to be more and more difficult. The thing is that we're still grading guys on a 10-year or a 10-season, participation. So a lot of these guys played pre-cap, and again, some guys have argued. And Alex David, we saw him at the field. I spoke to him. I respect Alex David a ton because I think as well, just like the argument is similar to Alex Godet, where he is very talented, but he may be capped at a certain division, and he's performed extremely well both statistically and he's just a respected player all around. So I think that at Division 5, at Division 4, where he has done quite well, to me, he wasn't hot dogging it. You know what I mean? So a guy like Alex David belongs in
He's
the
also
discussion.
played Division A. He's played Division
Exactly,
B.
he's challenged himself. Whereas some guys, and I mean, I'm not going to mention names, but there are some guys that you see have been consistently playing in lower divisions where you think, this guy should be at least challenging himself to attempt to participate against guys that are at his level, guys that are CIS talents playing in Division 5 or 6. To me, it's not fun for the guys you're playing against, and overall, the league is set up in a way to try to push you up. And if you're someone who's resisting that, that's fine. You're allowed to play. You're paying to play, and you're allowed to play wherever you want. But should you be a Hall of Famer? No.
And ultimately, just to clarify, when there was guidance given in terms of how to actually vote to the Hall of Fame players in the media, but it doesn't mean they necessarily need to abide by what we're talking about right now, right? I mean,
these are our personal beliefs.
Yeah.
They aren't.
It's very subjective, right? It's a subjective way of going about it. Yeah.
I think the attitude has changed. I think there are people that still say you need to play Division 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But I think people are saying, look, if people are playing competitively, then that's what matters.
Yeah,
And that's really what it's a recreational league, but it's a highly competitive recreational league.
For sure.
As new teams find out every season when they sign up for FPF, So that said, we have a whole slew of new inductees. When we come back, we'll get into the first inductee, and then the first inductee will be announced the same night that this podcast will air, and then following that, each night we will have a new inductee. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll come back with the first inductee of the 2017 FPF Hall of Fame class.